an original.
From Story Studio Network.
Well, here we go. Look at that. It is the 28th day of March. Welcome in. It's Now and Next, the flagship podcast for Story Studio Network. I'm Dave Trafford. And we had a bit of a bump in the schedule last week. So for those of you who were looking for the show, we're here. Not to worry. Yeah. And we had a little bit of content that's piled up. So we do want to get to a couple of things that we're talking about, and we'll get things back on track. I just want to flag the idea that you should actually be checking out On the Ledge, your Ontario politics podcast. Keith Leslie, John Wright, and I, this week, will read the entrails of the Ontario budget. I don't know about you, but budgets these days at any level of government are almost meaningless, except the municipal government, because that's where you live, right? Picking up the garbage, the cops on the street, the water that runs into your house, all that stuff. Yeah, that's kind of right where you live. All the bullshit around provincial and federal budgeting, it's meaningless. But that's just my thought. Ford government spending a record amount of money. They're conservatives, remember? Conservative at what? They're not even conservative at flip-flopping. Holy cow. Everything's the flip-flop. Sweet, merciful baby Jesus. Anyway, I'll be anxious to hear what John Wright and Keith Leslie have to say about that. The latest hairball coughed up by the Ford government. We had another hairball set for, I think it's the 16th of April, was the federal budget. Oh boy. Yeah. So anyway, we'll get into that. On the Ledge, your Ontario politics podcast. Go there. And if you haven't listened lately, do that. It's the longest running show in Story Studio Network. John and I started the show in 2018. It was the campaign that eventually landed Doug Ford in the big chair at Queen's Park. And it's been fun, and we've been cooking along ever since. And it's always good to have Keith Leslie around the table as well. Keith's got an abundance of experience at Queen's Park. He was the former bureau chief for broadcast news / Canadian Press. So, and he's still got his hand in it. So all good stuff to talk about. This week, of course, I guess it was on the weekend past. It was a rather vivid affair, as the way I qualified it. The funeral of the Right Honourable Brian Mulroney in Montreal, and it made me remember covering Pierre Elliott Trudeau's funeral in Montreal back in, I guess it was it 1999 or 2000? Anyway, I've lost track. But was there when the country sort of stopped down and said goodbye to Trudeau. And, say what you will about their politics, Trudeau and Mulroney, both these kind of legendary characters and figures and visionaries. And to the extent that people really don't like them, probably is measured in the degree to which they were visionaries. Not quite the same with the current Trudeau. The degree to which people don't like him is because, well, we're just tired of him. Right? That just seems to be the general feel to the whole thing. I'm not sure the country, generally speaking, is all that excited about the alternatives, but What's going to be really interesting when we get to a federal election? The voter turnout. Remember, the voter turnout in Ontario for the last provincial election was brutal. It sucked. Right? It was awful. And why? Well, I kind of go back to my point around budgets. They're meaningless. All they are have become this sort of foundational statements as to why they should be elected. Spending a record amount of money in this province, and still we've got problems in our healthcare and our education systems and long-term care. And I know they're going to tell you they're spending. I guarantee you, a year from now, we're not going to see any improvements in that. Yet we're going to see record spending, record deficit. So federally, it looks like the Conservatives are on track to run the table. Not sure how I feel about that. More to the point, and it has nothing to do with politics, it has more to the point around, I don't know that there's anybody in that set of leaders, and I say that specifically, it has nothing to do with parties anymore, that represents most of us. Everybody's going to sort of run around the margins. Even if Poilievre wins, and he could win a majority, he could do that with 38% of the vote. Ask our friend John Wright, right? So, and then take into account that people are disenfranchised, disengaged. So 38% of those who vote is what it's about. And if only 30% are voting, that's brutal. So that's going to be, for me, the real telltale in terms of what we can expect and where we should go with the next federal election. Anyway, yes, talking about Brian Mulroney and his funeral. And it was that week, the same week that Brian Mulroney's funeral was held, news came that Roy McMurtry passed away. Roy McMurtry was the Attorney General here in the province of Ontario in the Davis government. Threw his hat into the ring to run for the leadership after Davis stepped down. He was not successful. He was appointed as the High Commissioner in Britain, which is sort of like the ambassador to Britain for a number of years. And then he finished his career in public service, that is, as the Chief Justice of Ontario. And when he retired, and I think it was 2007, I had the honor and opportunity to sit down, spend an hour with him, and had a rather wide-ranging and just a comfortable conversation with him about what he was up to, looking back, a little bit of politics, mostly about the courts. And I found the interview a couple of days ago. And I thought it was remarkable that he was talking then, and this is 15 years ago, about issues that we're still facing today. So, bear with me, but I just thought it was worthwhile because I think, again, back to some of these legendary, visionary characters who used to patrol the halls of the legislatures in this country. Roy McMurtry was one of them. So I just thought it would be useful and helpful to introduce you, if you don't know Roy McMurtry, introduce you to him, or just kind of jog your memory a little bit about Roy McMurtry.
Is there any thought that you're going to miss this?
Oh, yes. I'll miss it. I've been a judge for 16 years, and it's been a very interesting chapter in my life.
And you've been here for a number of important things that haven't just happened in this place in Osgoode Hall. I mean, it's not just something that's happened in terms of the legal profession. These are issues that have certainly affected the lives of a lot of folks in Ontario, and I'm not quite sure they have a full understanding of the impact that some of the decisions that come out of this place have on. And does that sometimes frustrate you a little?
No, not really. I mean, just do our job and seek to do justice in every case. And we're not running for public office. And if what we accomplish is not always appreciated, I mean, that's just a reality of life.
I know you did come from public office and a long career in public service. Was that a difficult adjustment to make, coming from the political realm? I mean, I know there was a bit of a break in there.
Yes, a bit of a break when I was practicing law with my brother Bill. No, it was it's a different kind of life. But I mean, that old biblical injunction, for everything there's a season. And I was in Bill Davis's cabinet for 10 years, the Attorney General, and part of that time the Solicitor General. And then I went to Britain as the Canadian Ambassador, or High Commissioner, as they call as the title is in the Commonwealth. Mm-hmm. And then I came back to the practice of law for 2.5 years, and I realized that public service had meant a great deal to me. And when the opportunity came to join the judiciary, I was interested in that because I thought it was somewhere I could make a contribution. And all I could say, Dave, is that the time has gone by incredibly quickly.
When you talk about that sort of the balance there, and often, as we mentioned off the top, people don't really, appreciate what happens politically and what happens in the courts. The courts generally often get blamed for rewriting or creating new legislation. Is there a way of sort of navigating that? I mean, is it just a matter of legislators going back and writing better law?
Well, you have to act in a principled fashion, and certainly judges respect the role of elected members of Parliament, members of the legislature. But 25 years ago, when our Constitution was patriated with an entrenched Charter of Rights, I mean, the federal member of Parliament basically decided that the judges were going to have increased responsibility with respect to assuring that the acts of Parliament or the legislatures that their enactments could bear charter scrutiny. And certainly the members of Parliament and Mr. Trudeau as Prime Minister recognized that there was going to be an enhanced role for judges. Now, that's invariably caused a degree of controversy from time to time, but when you think of the actual sections of acts of Parliament that have been struck down over the past 25 years, there are not that many. But there's some very controversial cases come along, as we know, and certainly as far as my court is concerned, the case involving same-sex marriage clearly caused a lot of controversy. But we were just applying the Charter values as we saw them.
Yeah, you make that sound simple, though. Clearly that was not a simple decision to come to.
No, it was not a simple decision. But the Supreme Court of Canada had laid down various guidelines with respect to under Section 15, the equality section, particularly when it came to sort of individual self-respect and individual dignity. And so I think we applied the Charter, Section 15 of the Charter, fairly, and I think in the public interest. But obviously there are issues on which even reasonable people will disagree.
And can we separate that debate from the political debate that's still going on and may go on for a while from what happened in the courts? I mean, or are they actually one affecting the other?
Well, I think the political debate has pretty much ended as far as the same-sex marriage is concerned. I mean, there was a resolution that was introduced by the Prime Minister, many weeks ago and was defeated. I mean, I think it's a fact of life, and I think people will realize that the world goes on quite normally, but I think for same-sex couples, it's given them an added increased feeling of dignity and self-respect. which I think we would agree is important for any human being.
Do you think government has done a good job, just generally, choosing and framing what is not only the judiciary, but those who occupy the bench as judges across the country?
I think governments, both federally and provincially, have done a good job in selecting people to become judges. And in this, they're helped by these Judicial Advisory Appointments Committee, and both provincially and federally. And there was a certain degree of controversy caused when the Prime Minister decided that on these Judicial Advisory Appointments Committee, there would be at least one member on every committee representing law enforcement. And I think that caused a degree of unfortunate controversy because what we seek to have and what we hope to have are judges who are impartial. And if it comes to criminal work, that every judge who sits on a criminal case will be impartial as between the prosecution and the accused. But the impression was created that the Prime Minister and his colleagues might be interested in appointing judges who are more prosecution-minded. Now, my own view is that I don't think that'll happen. And actually,
with or without the law enforcement?
With or without. I think there's a certain dynamic that takes place on these committees. I'm confident that although an unfortunate impression was created, I'm confident that the recommendations will be good recommendations. And the federal government has made a number of judicial appointments over the last year, and from everything I've heard, they've been good appointments.
Is there room for electing judges in this country?
No. I mean, when you look at what goes on in the U.S., I think it's nothing short of scandalous in some areas. I mean, the amount of fundraising that is done by judges who wish to be elected or re-elected, and major donors, according to what I've read, often appear before these judges later on after they're selected. I think it's just something that is totally foreign to the Canadian legal culture. And while it might be welcome, while it might be welcomed by a few of our fellow citizens, I think would be the vast majority of people would disapprove. Because when judges are selected, they're not selected because they, to my knowledge, and over many, many years, because they have any particular political philosophy or political ideology. And doesn't mean that they're not influenced by their life experiences. But I think the people in Ontario, certainly where I know the judges better than I do in other parts of the country, but I think the people of Ontario and indeed of Canada are very well served by the judges who have been selected. I mean, there's the odd one that turns into a bit of a disappointment, but when you look at the overall average, I think
you don't want to name names.
It's extremely good. No, I don't.
When we talk about this, though, it's interesting to see we talk about the court evolving too, and certainly the Truscott case recently has been a mark in that evolution. And it sounds simple, but how much pressure was on you in both counts to be able to say, yes, we're going to put the cameras in that courtroom?
Well, I've never had any particular difficulty with the idea of television cameras in appellate courts. We've had television cameras in the Supreme Court of Canada for some years now, and it seems to work fine. I think where the issue becomes somewhat controversial is the presence of cameras in trial courts and issues related to privacy and how people do react differently when they know that they're giving evidence on television. There may be privacy concerns with respect to being required to give evidence, and certainly with respect to the jurors. And I think the debate will continue. I mean, it's gone on for some years as to whether or not we should have cameras in the trial courts. But so far, all of the Canadian courts have felt that it's inappropriate. But I see that as a far different situation than cameras in the appellate courts.
And based on that experience with the Truscott case, did it meet your expectation? Was it something that was there a surprise there in terms of the way the media responded?
No. I mean, I think it worked very well. I think it was described as a pilot project, but I think it worked very well, and I don't think the presence of the cameras in the courtroom really affected the presentation of the arguments or the dialogue between the individual judges and the individual counsel. I think it worked quite well, and I expect that we'll see cameras in appellate courts and in the Court of Appeal in future months and years.
Do you get the sense that the public responded well to that? I don't know if you get it, because it occurred to me that as we saw that unfold and we saw it play out over the course of what it was a couple of weeks, I guess.
Yeah.
I thought it was interesting to see the public feedback because it wasn't your law and order scenario. We really saw the legal system at work here, and it was a better view of the way the courts worked. I don't know if that was part of the consideration when you were looking at that.
Oh, yes. I mean, to us, having cameras in the courts had a very important educational dimension. Mm-hmm. And from what I've heard of people who saw it on the CBC website and whatnot, quite apart from the clips that would be on the news, it seemed to have gone very well. And the CBC prepared a very good website with lots of background information. And I would like to think, having, of course, it's my court, and I presided over the Truscott appeal or the Truscott reference. And I would hope that most people, if not everyone, would be impressed by the manner in which the legal system works at the appellate court level.
Well, certainly, I think one of the things that struck me is how people understood that the cases were far more complicated than they might be in a 30-minute television program.
Yes, that's right.
And the weight of what is actually happening, it really does depend on, in this case, the 5 judges that sat on that case. So to me, I guess I didn't really understand how little perhaps people understood about the courts. So from that perspective, I was a little surprised by that.
Yes. Well, I mean, the people haven't been exposed to the Canadian courts outside the Supreme Court of Canada to a great extent. But certainly my view is that it was a positive experience for everybody.
How much of that is our role in the media? I mean, some of that, we twist, torque, and paint things, whether you like it or not. And certainly it reflects on what happens in this place.
Well, I mean, we live in an age where there's a sort of almost a daily explosion of news. And I think that we in the justice system are very much aware of the limitations that most journalists have when it comes to reporting what actually goes on in the courtroom. And it's very difficult to you just don't have the time to give lengthy reports for the most part, and with very few exceptions. And so it's not surprising that the public traditionally have got rather a fragmentary and perhaps sometimes a bit of a distorted view as to what goes on in the courtrooms. And that's unfortunate. And there again, that's why I think the television of the Truscott reference had an important, as I've already said, educational dimension.
Once you close the office and you take all the paintings down and you pack up the boxes and you go to sort of citizen McMurtry's life, are there things that you will spend your time doing in your retirement? I mean, I'm assuming family will be important, but
oh yes, and I mean I expect to find work. When people ask me these questions, I often mention that my wife has, from time to time, reminds me that our wedding vows did not include lunch. So
find your own pal. Yeah.
So I expect to find some work to do, and maybe associated with a law firm, but we'll see what happens. And I certainly don't intend to stop working.
I know a lot of the energy you've spent lately is on the whole idea of the Second Chance program, and that has been kind of a you have given that impetus. I know you're working with the Mayor's
Second Chance Scholarship, yes,
and you're working with the Mayor's Committee.
Yes.
So, talk to me about the importance of that, because too often, and what strikes me about that scholarship, for example, is it's directed specifically at young people who are at risk,
yes.
but who are in the education program. So who have come to know the likes of the justices in this place or judges or JPs, not because they know them socially, but because they've been in trouble.
Well, that's right. They've been in trouble, and they've demonstrated ability to turn their lives around. And the Second Chance Scholarship, as you well know, gives them an opportunity to do that because it helps them with their tuition fees. And there have been some wonderful success stories. But we have to do a great deal more as a community to keep our young people in school, to give them hope that they're going to have the opportunity to live useful lives. And there are a lot of young people who are potentially at risk and who are in many ways disadvantaged. And I think the community has to continue to pull together in a very effective way in order to deal with these issues, to give young people opportunities. It's something that has always been very important to me. And as I've often said, the administration of justice bears daily witness to the tragedies involving young people who perhaps never had a first chance, let alone a second chance. And the causes are often very complicated. But it more often than not, it involves young people who just haven't been given a fair chance in life.
You know, I was at the Toronto Summit recently, and much of what was talked about was the need to get federal money and provincial money and so on. But there was an important emphasis placed on the diversity in this city. And I think it was David Pico was talking about how important it was to recognize and take advantage of our diversity. But he also made the point of saying we can't just be a tolerant society. We really have to sort of get beyond just tolerating each other.
Yes.
And we kind of have to reach out beyond that. Mm-hmm. And I'm finding that at that level, we're talking about kids at risk. Sometimes that's what it comes down to, is trusting one another from community to community to community. And when you see it work, typically there is that sort of outreach program in a very literal way.
Well, we need outreach programs, and Toronto has often been described as the most diverse city in the world, and I think it may well be. And this does present certain very significant challenges to everybody who lives in the community. But at the same time, despite our ongoing challenges, and the ongoing challenges are significant, I still believe that we've demonstrated a level of tolerance and civility that it doesn't exist in most parts of the world. But that doesn't mean for a moment that we don't have some distance to go, and that we need to bring government and the private sector and the community working more in concert to resolve some of these issues, to give young people opportunities, to give them a reasonable choice in life. And many of them, when you look at their circumstances, don't have much of a reasonable choice.
Is there something that, based on that your experience with the scholarship program, 2 or 3 things that you think we really need to be paying attention to in that respect?
Well, I think the most important thing is keeping young people in school.
Yeah.
And I think because the dropout rate throughout Ontario is pretty high, in some areas it's reported that it's approaching 40%. And I think it's very important that there be programs and there are programs now, but they have to be expanded considerably. I mean, homework clubs, and for example, recreation centers, perhaps they can combine recreation and homework. And of course, skills training. And I've been involved in a number of these programs which try and meet some of these needs. But in many ways, we're just scratching the surface. And a lot more has to be done. I've had a long association with Frontier College, for example, which is a wonderful organization. It's been around for more than 100 years. One of the leaders in literacy issues, young people and older people. And I remember the president saying to me not long ago that, we were involved in 50 homework clubs in the Toronto area, which is an important contribution. But he said we need 500. Mm-hmm. And this is why I've been encouraging the universities to create more of a culture. I mean, it exists to some extent now, more of a culture of volunteerism in order to have the students, who I think for the most part are very well motivated, working with young people.
In a mentoring role as well.
Role as well as a tutoring role.
Sure.
And this is what we've been trying to develop through the advisory committee that I have chaired for the mayor. And I hope when I leave my present job that I'll be able to continue to be active in the community, because it does mean a great deal to me.
Will you spend more time painting?
Well, I'm not sure that I will. I still find a little bit of time. And I guess one of the reasons is I've never taken up the game of golf, and I'm not suggesting it's not a great sport, but it's time consuming. But I've enjoyed painting as a hobby, and being able to contribute to paintings to charity auctions, and that's given me a degree of pleasure. And it's a very interesting change of pace from the rigors of the law from day to day.
How much gets solved when you actually sit down on your own and you work on a painting? Because I can imagine there's all kinds of things going through your head over what's on the canvas.
Well, more often than not, it's sort of an escape from my daily responsibilities. But the odd good idea pops into my head, and hopefully that's as a result of the hobby I've pursued for some years. But it's given me a great deal of pleasure, and I hope to be able to continue it in the months and maybe even hopefully years ahead.
Where do you like to do that?
Well, I like to, we have a little cottage on an island in Lake Muskoka, and I often paint up there, often from photographs that I've taken elsewhere. We've had the odd sketch trip to Europe and elsewhere. And so I have quite a collection of subjects, but it's a wonderful way to relax. But with 11 grandchildren, there are a few wonderful distractions.
Quiet moments.
Not as many quiet moments. And of course, that's a pleasure. Wouldn't want to be surrounded by too much silence.
When you finish here, what will sort of be your parting thought as you leave the job here at Osgoode Hall as the Chief Justice?
Well, my parting thought will be that I've been very fortunate, privileged to have served in this position for more than 11 years, and as a Chief Justice on the trial court for 5 years. And it's just simply been a privilege of being able to serve the public in this respect. And I hope people will believe that I truly cared about my responsibilities and that I tried to make things a little better. But in any event, the overriding impression or memory that I'll have is that it was a wonderful job, a very interesting job to be able to pursue for some years. And of course, as elected member of the legislature, I found that to be a very interesting job. I don't think politicians, quite frankly, get as much credit as they deserve for the hard work they put in with clear intention to make things better for their fellow citizens. I worry sometimes or often about the degree of skepticism or indeed cynicism that has grown up around the political process, because that was an important part of my life, and I was certainly pleased to have been served there.
When your predecessor, or your successor rather, comes into this office, will you be called upon to offer some free advice and guidance?
Well, I hope my successor will be somebody I know very well. I rather expect it well, although I can't offer any names, but I certainly believe that my successor won't need much advice from me. I have an excellent Associate Chief Justice, Dennis O'Connor, and I think most people expect that he'll be my successor, but I guess I shouldn't be really speculating about that, because that's the decision of the Prime Minister of the country. But certainly the friendships that I've developed in this building and elsewhere in the judiciary, those friendships will continue and will remain very special for me.
Chief Justice Roy McMurtry, thank you. It's been an honor.
Well, thank you very much, Steve. Thank you for your visit.
Yeah, it was a visit. It wasn't really an interview. So anyway, I enjoyed that, and I enjoyed listening back to it and becoming and sort of reminiscing and remembering at the same time. The great Roy McMurtry. And I hope you enjoyed that. So we are going to talk a little bit more about U.S. politics next week on the show. John Wright is going to join us, along with David Schultz. John Wright, of course, is the veteran pollster from Maru Public Opinion. And David Schultz, if you're a close and careful listener to this program, you will know that David is the professor of political science and a constitutional law expert, and has been our go-to guy since the Trump era began in the United States. And just to talk about some of the disconnection between what's actually happening in the U.S. around consumer confidence versus voter confidence. There seems to be a real disconnect there. And John has done some research that has tracked the attitudes of Americans in terms of their view of the economy, how optimistic they are, how buoyant they are, or are they at all. But here's the spoiler alert. By all accounts, they feel reasonably optimistic, more so than they did in the past couple of years. But that's not resonating on the campaign for the Democrats particularly. The language of outrage and the sense that people are going without drives the political narrative. So we're going to get into that a little bit in the weeds, but I think it's an important conversation to have as we watch the election unfold in the U.S. So that's coming up next week right here on Now and Next. It is the flagship podcast for Story Studio Network.
Pay no attention to that man behind the curtain.
Now and Next is Story Studio Network's flagship podcast, produced by our chief executive producer, Dave Trafford, and supported by our entire SSN team, including our senior producers, Becky Coles and Jen Hudson, our technical producer and audio editor, Mike Trutler. Jamie Nickerson is our production manager, and our sonic logo designer is Greg McDonald. Also, I'm Erin Trafford, Queen of the Universe.
And that's all I have to say about that.
Okay, everybody, that's a wrap.
This is SSN.
Story Studio Network.